It's the last panel of the day, y'all. We're almost through. Can everyone do me a favor while we get settled? If you're sitting at the outside, can you scoot in? Come into the center, because we have a whole bunch of people coming in the back, and they want to join. And can I get people who are sitting back there by the window, come sit in the front row? We're not scary, and I'm lonely. Please come join us up here. So let's give everyone a minute to come in, to get settled. We're going to close it out strong. I wore my saucy sneakers, y'all. We're going to close this out strong. Fantastic. All right, well, welcome everyone to our discussion today. We're closing out 2 amazing, amazing days of programs and conversations and collaboration with the Atlantic Council. So thanks so much to DFR Lab for this incredible event. Let's give them a round of applause quickly. An incredible, incredible 2 days. So I am here today to talk about digital sovereignty, to talk about the digital hammers that are currently fracturing the internet, and how we think about a future where we may not always have the interoperable and global web that we've come to expect and come to rely on around the world. I am Kat Duffy, as Graham noted. I am a non-resident fellow at DFR Lab. I advise companies and governments and INGOs on developing strategies to align emerging technologies with democratic norms and human rights, and on building socially responsible business practices within the technology sector. I am joined today, to my right, by David Frauci, who is the Senior Director for European Government and Regulatory Affairs at the Internet Society, by Usama Khilji, who is joining us virtually. There's Usama. He's the Executive Director of Bolobi, one of Pakistan's most influential digital rights organizations, and Kenton Thibault, a resident fellow at DFR Lab and a PhD candidate at Georgetown University. And Kenton's work is focused on Chinese influence operations, China's role in the global information environment, and the implications of that for democratic resilience. And I am going to start our discussion today off with a quote. "The state must control this area completely. Of course, not from the point of view of restrictions or some kind of totalitarian control, but from the point of view of the realization of national interests." And that was Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova about 2 weeks ago via a state media outlet. And I thought that that quote very nicely summed up a lot of the struggle that we're facing right now, with the idea that in order to have national security, you must have a digital sovereignty that would essentially break an interoperable web. And so with that, I wanted to start, David, with you. So you're a government affairs official, you're a telecommunications engineer, you have deep expertise in telecom and in digital regulations, particularly in the EU. And over the past decade, we've seen the Russian government consistently seek to unplug Russia from the internet. And over the past 5 months, we've seen a really dramatic shift in their self-isolation from the interoperable web, as well as in external calls to cut Russia off from the web. Can you give us a brief explanation of what those calls have looked like, how Russia's relationship with the global and interoperable web has changed this year, and what you believe the most important takeaways for this audience are?
Okay. So first, I will just say that I work for the Internet Society. It's a nonprofit that was founded 30 years ago by the same people who created the Internet. And our mission is to defend the Internet, to maintain it open, globally connected, trustworthy, and secure. In the last months, it is important to remind that when Russia invaded Ukraine, the Ukrainian government asked ICANN and the RIPE NCC to disconnect Russia. And this was a very strange petition. ICANN had to analyze this very carefully because it had political motivations. And finally, they decided to take the right decision, which is not disconnect Russia. Their mission is to connect networks, not to disconnect them. So it is important that the technical community reacts like this, because we are here to ensure that the network remains connected. And also, it is important to realize that if this had happened, if ICANN or RIPE had decided to disconnect Russia, that would have given the Kremlin the right excuse. It's the arguments that the Western world controls the internet and it is a tool for us to shape the world behind a policy different than theirs. So we see Russia trying to disconnect themselves, or not to disconnect, but to ensure that they have the capability to, when there is a threat, that they have a control of what's going on in the network there. So yeah, we have to keep in mind that this is wrong, and we should not give them every excuse to do that. Some companies have decided also to withdraw from that market. And although that's a legitimate decision, companies do whatever they want, it also fuels the Kremlin's positions. So yeah, we have to keep an eye on policies, because it's not only governments like the Russian autocrat government that wants to do this with the citizens, but also other governments, without knowing, they might be developing policies that harm the internet. So we are keeping an eye on those. Also, some of them, they're set up with good faith, but some of the decisions they take, they do have some implications. And civil society, like our organization, needs to keep an eye on what's going on to ensure that they don't harm the internet. I'll leave it there so we can continue the conversation later.
That's great. And so I think, for me, an important takeaway from what you're saying is that there's also various ways to splinter or various ways to cut off access. Yeah. So you've got everything from a call to an international governing body to cut a country off, all the way up to the regulatory or sort of policy or application layer, where the governments are putting in more control over what citizens can access, but you still have the interoperable web as that underlying infrastructure, at least. Kenton, you, on the other hand, are a China scholar, and China has approached this relatively differently. And one of your areas of expertise and study is around how China has centered the internet at the heart of its broader strategy to shift global discourse and normative frameworks away from liberal democratic norms and towards a narrative that is more affirming of China's vision and political and geopolitical aims. So do you see similarities between the way that Russia has recently been approaching the web and China's strategy, or do you think of them as being fundamentally quite different?
I see China's strategy as fundamentally seeking a transformation of the international order. And by international order, I mean norms and values and a mode of distribution or institutional arrangements that seek to distribute those values in either an economic way or a military security way. So China seeks to transform the system, whereas Russia is more in the position of having to disrupt. So China being in the position of wanting to transform, this leads to kind of a different strategy. It leads to a strategy that's more about shaping the international environment versus pursuing strategies of disruption. And this has both material and normative components. And material we think of as, the infrastructure, digital infrastructure, and then normative norms of how we govern data. So China is a big proponent of what they term as cyber sovereignty, which privileges very much this state-centric state control of data within a country's borders. And this isn't, out of a respect for other countries' development conditions, though there is a demand side to that. This is about a broader strategy where China is thinking about both this infrastructure and this kind of regulatory application, these two pieces as part of this broader whole. And so this is part of a strategy to ensure that, not just these material networks, but also normative frameworks that govern how they are used are designed around channeling valuable data, channeling norms in a way that places China at the center of the global digital order. And China has the ability to do so. It spent about $140 billion on BRI projects as of 2020, and it spent $80 billion on digital Silk Road projects, which is the digital component of the BRI. And so the main takeaway from that is that China really views the internet as a system of control rather than as a communication platform. And this kind of plays out in the cyber-physical, which China sees as being mutually constitutive. So there's not really a separation between kind of this regulatory and infrastructure aspect that we kind of see in debates oftentimes in the West. So that's kind of the key takeaway, is that they view this as very much an integrated system. And I do want to say their internal, the party has kind of designed reconstituted the system to really towards this goal. So consolidating party control with Xi Jinping at the center, in charge of determining the policy direction for all of the bodies in the party that are responsible for both internet governance, digital governance, and things like external propaganda. So these are also viewed as like two sides of the same coin. For example, the Cyberspace Affairs Commission, the head of the Cyberspace Affairs Commission, which is in charge of governing policy guidance on things like public opinion and how algorithms are used. The head of that is also the vice minister of the Central Propaganda Department. So China views these things as mutually constitutive, as interrelated, and that's kind of the key takeaway there.
And so one difference then that we're really hearing as well is that China doesn't really see any air or any space between what the infrastructural level would be, what the regulatory or the policy level would be. It's all part of one very significant strategy that has been backed by about $220 billion recently, as opposed to Russia, which is navigating more of a stuck a bit with the interoperable web as its base layer and then has to operate across that.
And if I could just do a quick example. So just to kind of illustrate how integrated this system is, you have Chinese companies which have pursued internationalization strategies in recent years, and they have to kind of put this under the framework of the Digital Silk Road or the BRI. And so, for example, there's this data company called Lianlian Digital who does a lot of the e-commerce work on the Digital Silk Road. China pitches, deals, e-commerce deals with companies like Lianlian Digital in regional forums like the Forum for China-Africa Cooperation, and it pitches deals with companies like this under this rubric of gaining cyber sovereignty. So if you have this payment system with Lianlian Digital, you are coming one step closer to gaining cyber sovereignty, gaining control over your data flows. But really, it's kind of this, there's a hypocrisy in there because it's actually designed to lock in countries to certain cyber-physical systems that then feed back into the party state and enhance their ability to enact control.
And so, Usama, I want to turn it to you in the screen. Hello, my friend. You are an internationally known digital rights activist, as well as the executive director, as I said, of one of the most respected digital rights organizations in Pakistan. And I think, you and I have discussed before that discussions of splinter nets frequently sort of devolve into, well, there's a sort of US/EU, and then there's Russia, and then there's China, and that's how it's framed. But we're seeing governments around the world taking different approaches to harnessing the web within their boundaries, to establishing their own attempts at digital sovereignty, and doing so in a way that would promote their own sort of social, political, and economic priorities as governments. Can you speak to that broader trend? Because this is also something we're really seeing in South Central Asia, in particular. And I'd love to hear from you about, within those trends as well, are there really important pragmatic realities that you feel are often missed in this broader discourse that is somewhat binary? Hold on. Hold on, Usama, we're having some trouble with your audio. 1 second.
All right.
You want to try now?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I think I want to address, South and Central Asia, where you have a lot of democracies that are sort of, you have India and Pakistan that have been independent for, say, around 75 years. The post-colonial states that are really trying to find their footing into the system. You have Pakistan that has had bouts of military dictatorship as well. Then you have Bangladesh that's sort of younger. But overall, there seems to be, for these states, a lot of variety because they have the Russian model, they have the Chinese model, they have the US-EU model. But at the end of the day, I also want to address some limitations for countries like us. So if you take the US is spied on multiple countries across the world, and Pakistan was the second most spied on country. At the same time, you have the Chinese internet system and the China-Pakistan economic corridor, bringing in a lot of Chinese fiber optic investments, as well as safe city projects that are photographing every citizen that lives in the large cities within Pakistan. So there are different systems that these countries are looking at, and now we have at multiple levels. So first, you have this centralized monitoring system. So in Pakistan, it's called the Web Monitoring System, which uses deep packet technology, which is a dual-use surveillance technology. Which has the ability to censor content at the root, at the entry point, and has the ability to filter content as well. And India, on the other hand, also has a central monitoring system, which pretty much does the same. You've had talks about, TikTok being banned in India. So TikTok has been blocked in India for a few years now, just because of the political tensions between India and China. And in Pakistan, on the other hand, you've also seen the TikTok being banned for around 5 times and then unblocked, but essentially for different censorship reasons that the state gives. But what we're overall seeing is that there's a lot of technology that is available in the open market, which is for censorship, which is for surveillance, and even democratic countries are exporting it. So for example, Sandvine is exporting this technology for filtration and censorship from Canada. So are there any export controls that are being put in place? Is civil society in the West talking about how exports from their own countries are undermining democratic values globally? And on the other hand, we're looking at, Western democracies that are coming up with laws and regulations that undermine digital freedoms overall, not within only within their own territories, but also seek to sort of bring this model. You had the NetzDG law in Germany, you had the Avia law in France, and while it was being debated, countries in Asia started copying those laws and bringing them in and saying, oh, if France or Germany can do this, we can do this too. But then we're looking at rule of law issues, and they're not really being implemented in the best way. They're being abused. So I think that's also something that civil society globally needs to work on together in order to cooperate on these issues and put their heads together and say, okay, what if this proposal was to come in? What will be the global ramifications on how the internet functions? And then take the step forward further, keeping that in mind. And I think these are some realities that we're looking at in this new field of the internet that brings up a lot more questions and the need for a lot more conversations.
And Usama, you'd mentioned that TikTok, for example, has been banned and then unbanned, something like 5 times. What are you seeing that is different in Pakistan that is resulting in these laws or these regulations being pushed out and then getting turned over, and what's informing that?
I think in Pakistan, what's been really wonderful is the multi-stakeholder advocacy that has been very strong. So you have an informed civil society that has been partnering with the media to raise awareness on censorship and surveillance issues, and to inform the debate among citizens and among policymakers as to how that really functions. Then you have the civil society working with the media, but also lawyer groups. And these are citizen-led lawyer groups, political parties are being involved, and these multi-stakeholder advocacy has been so strong that the courts have been forced to listen, that the parliament and governments have been forced to take back a lot of their decisions, and there's this constant pushback from citizens. You know, in Pakistan, we have a tradition of resistance. We've kicked out around 3 military dictators that were backed by the US, and were back to sort of a democratic systems over there. So the civil society and the multi-stakeholder alliances that are being formed are very strong, and I feel they really provide a very good example. So, for example, in the past 3 or 4 months, we've seen criminal defamation being decriminalized by high courts in Pakistan. We've also seen social media regulation that sort of legalized censorship being struck down by courts and advising the parliament to look at them again through, you know, multi-stakeholder processes. So I think these were completely locally led efforts, and they sort of, you know, give us a very good model that can globally be replicated better.
That's fantastic and great to hear. And I think turning to that multi-stakeholder point, David, obviously ISOC is involved in many multi-stakeholder initiatives. And I know that this is something ISOC has been putting a lot of thought into as well, in terms of how civil society can come together and play a stronger role in working with governments as they're considering new regulations or new policies to look at what the impact of those would be. Can you speak a little bit to ISOC's work there?
Yeah. We have developed a toolkit that helps identify if a given policy includes aspects that would harm the internet. So what we have done, we have identified what are the components that make the internet be the internet that we all want to have and we want to preserve. And we can run any policy through this lens so that we can identify if there are negative aspects. This helps us create an impact assessment, internet impact assessment report. And we can share this with policymakers so that they can be aware of the consequences of the draft they are developing. We are helping our community understand how this toolkit works, and we are teaching them how to create reports and briefs based on this toolkit. And we are already analyzing policy proposals around the globe with good outcomes, because we are achieving change. We are putting this in hands of our community and civil society, and we are actually making some changes in policy. So this is great. Splinternet has been mentioned a couple of times, and I want to just explain a little bit to the audience what would that mean to the people using the internet. So imagine you go to a country and then your normal search tool does not work. You have to use a search tool that is local, and then the results of that search tool would be curated or adjusted to what the government wants you to see. Or imagine that you are making some tourism, you take pictures and you want to upload pictures to a favorite photo sharing app. And then you find that in this given country, your app doesn't work. That would be because the government has set up rules on content sharing that are not, that your app is not complying to. So your app doesn't work or is not available there. So that means that Splinternet can be done by either cutting the cables, and this happens, or cutting the services, as in Pakistan, where TikTok has been banned and reaccepted, right? But it can also happen because of policies that are developed by countries. And this is not happening only in autocratic countries. This is also happening in places here, like here in Europe. And just to give an example, there's something on the table now that's called DNS for EU. And it doesn't have to be bad per se. They want to set up a new infrastructure that would help resolve IP addresses within Europe. If implemented well, it will give resilience and better performance to the network in Europe. But if implemented wrong, it can also give governments the tool to filter and analyze what customers are doing on the web. And this is wrong. So what we, as an organization, what we do is we keep track of these proposals and we help identify which need to be modified to ensure that the internet remains open.
And I think one thing we have seen, especially with the significant increase in regulations that have been coming out of Europe in the past couple of years, is that Europe has had a very significant commitment to multi-stakeholder engagement and to having a broad range of different organizations and different types of expertise from civil society, from academia, from industry, in negotiations and in discussions. And Kenton, on this point, I want to turn it over to you because that strikes me as markedly different than China's very quiet and deep approach to multilateral negotiations in the internet governance space over a number of years, which includes their current advocacy to back Russia's bid for the presidency of the ITU this fall. And so I'm wondering if you can help give us an understanding of how multilateralism plays into China's strategy and multi-stakeholderism certainly would not.
Yes, so multilateralism is one of the norms, along with cyber sovereignty, that China is really trying to push as kind of the way to do business on the world stage with regards to internet issues. This is because multilateralism privileges kind of state-to-state interactions, and it's government to government, and it eschews a multi-stakeholder approach precisely because China does not want civil society actors involved. This isn't just government to government, it's also Chinese corporate entities to other governments. And while in countries like the US, multinational companies like Exxon have very sophisticated foreign policy shops within them advocating for Exxon's interests. Here, in a company like Huawei, they also are, have a very sophisticated foreign policy shop, but they are advocating on the interest of the CCP. And going back to this idea of everything goes back to ensuring the security of the Chinese Communist Party with Xi at the core, and these two sentences can't be separated. Huawei, the party committee of Huawei has to approve any sort of deal or whatever, or interaction that would happen with Huawei and a sovereign government, and make sure that the terms of whatever agreement would meet the security and propaganda guidance from the central committee and the bodies that carry that out. So this is all very much when I say that this is the internet is a system of control, all of these there's this web, and China wants to put itself at the center, and then all of these cyber and physical systems are meant to feed back into this, and then China can leverage this to exert more social control, either locally or abroad.
And Usama, you had referenced this sort of briefly in your earlier remarks, but I wanted to come back to it. When we think about the multi-stakeholder approach that has been taken recently in the EU, as someone who is a member of South Central Asian civil society, but who has seen the impact of EU laws be particularly bad, right, in multiple countries around the world outside of the jurisdiction of the EU. What is your take on the current approach to multi-stakeholderism? What is important about it, and what are its current flaws when we're looking not just domestically but cross-regionally at the way that different policies and regulations are being constructed? Oh, sorry, we're missing audio again. Let's try now.
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay. Hello, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Perfect. Yeah, so just as the internet, I think, is an interoperable platform for global, I think the regulations around the internet also tend to be very global in the sense that when someone does something, everyone's looking to copy that. But then it turns things around when those efforts are trying to create borders around the internet. And that's what we're seeing with a lot of the European regulations and the ramifications of those in countries outside of Europe. There are some very good points around it. So, for example, with the GDPR, we're seeing an uptick in data protection and privacy laws around the world. A lot of countries are trying to match up to those standards, and especially the European requirement that in order to do business or data transfers, you have to have equal or better regulation and legislation present, I think is a good precedent. But on the other hand, when it comes to regulating content, I think that's where a lot of the issues come up. So, for example, David also mentioned DNS servers, how those are being regulated in the EU. In Pakistan, we're seeing this very similar conversation happening, where the regulator is trying to get the internet service providers to enforce a centralized DNS system, whereby a lot of the content will be controlled. And it connects to the Chinese approach, that Kenton mentioned, which Pakistan is trying to emulate because of its, strong links with China, where they're trying to centralize information, to censor information, content, and to carry out mass surveillance. And this also extends to, say, things such as criticism of the Pakistani partnership with China. When we demand more transparency, these efforts are met with silence or more oppression or more censorship. And I think that's where this need for civil societies across the globe to work together in order to connect on nodes. So a lot of times when we speak to counterparts in South Asia and Central Asia, we laugh a lot because we're like, okay, India and Pakistan really don't get along. The governments hate each other. But what we're seeing is that the approaches that the governments in Bangladesh and India and Pakistan are taking are very, very similar. So that's where the civil society also has to put their heads together. And especially when it comes to, say, European civil society and American civil society, because the impact of that is so much on the rest of the world, that if we lock our heads together and do our advocacy together globally, only then can we save the global nature of the internet. And something I also want to add related to what we're seeing with the Russia-Ukraine conflict is there's been a very bad precedent of censoring a lot of Russian news platforms that we're seeing happen. And, this is a slippery slope where in future, a lot of supposedly global platforms will censor news organizations from different countries. Yes, they may be engaging in disinformation and propaganda, but the right approach is not to be paternalistic and to decide for citizens what has to be seen or what can be accessed by them. The right approach has to be to counter that disinformation in effective ways, right? So the reason I'm mentioning this is that then it's also encouraging other governments to sort of censor news websites from other countries that they don't seem friendly. And what the impact of that then is further propaganda from states within territories and walls built around the internet. And citizens at the end of the day do not have access to information that they should rightfully have and make that decision rather than states make the decisions for them.
That's fascinating. Thank you so much, Usama. And I wanted to pull in one question that we had gotten from the crowd. And David, I'm going to direct this to you. And it's, to what extent can we rely on VPNs and anonymizers, such as the Tor browser, to circumvent online censorship?
Well, I just read it before, and I think it's a weird question because what VPNs and the Tor browser does is that they mask who you are, or they allow you to browse in a way that the network would not be able to identify you. But that is not related to online censorship. Online censorship is more related to changes on what is published or changes on what the government wants you to read or not, but not related to your browsing activity. Now, if the question is to what extent you can trust your VPN that you are really masked, that your identity is really masked, then, well, it depends on the VPN, and it's a matter of trust. You normally pay an amount, and you have to trust that they promise to do what they, that they do what they promise to do in the terms and conditions, that they will not store your online activity and that they will not share it with a third party. But it's only a matter of trust.
And to the extent that we've seen, for example, Russian citizens, for example, still accessing Twitter but through a VPN, right? We've also seen an increasing number of laws around the world that are trying to illegalize VPNs or create commercial restrictions on VPNs, such that, for example, there's a new regulation that was just proposed in India, I think 2 weeks ago, that would require VPNs to centralize all of the information and log all of the VPN traffic in India, which makes it pretty hard to be a VPN. And so we're seeing lots of different laws and regulations springing up that would give companies the ability to control the commercial products that were available in their country that would help evade the direct access restrictions and the other regulatory restrictions they have put on their own digital space. We're running short on time, and so what I would love to do is sum up, because one of the things we had promised is that we would not end this summit on a kind of note, right? We have promised that we would come out of here with some constructive, solid suggestions for things that we think democracies can do to respond to this and to help turn this around. These are a few of the things that I have heard in the discussion today, but please tell me what you think I'm missing. The first one is to think carefully before, if you are a government, US and EU colleagues who are here, to think very carefully about agreeing to a solely multilateral process. Is multilateralism a honeypot? That is my question to you. It is faster, it is more efficient, it is easier to operationalize as a government, it is less chaotic, it works a lot better with a government budget, and it also plays directly into a multi-billion-dollar, multi-year-long strategy run by the most authoritarian country in the geopolitical sort of power space. So the lure of multilateralism is strong, but are you being lured into a honeypot? Is that really where you want to end up, right? This would be my first question and my suggestion to especially policymaking colleagues here. Reinvest, double down, innovate, and think very carefully about how you support multi-stakeholder engagement, about the breadth of what that multi-stakeholder engagement is. Should it go beyond your jurisdiction and allow for those outside of your jurisdiction to weigh in? If you already know that the ramifications of the policy decisions that you are making are likely to extend beyond your jurisdiction, can you work with civil society like ISOC to think through toolkits and to think through approaches that ease that debate and ease that discussion for policymakers, especially while we still have so many people who are learning the space and learning the more technical elements of the questions that they're examining, right? And Osama, I think you and I have talked a lot about this as well, trying to engage in strong multi-stakeholder processes at a time where civil society is facing closing civic space, is closing foreign funding restrictions, right, and is under increasing pressure around the world, it's very difficult. And so we need governments to be thinking in very imaginative and profound ways about what true multi-stakeholder engagement would look like and how they change procurement methods, how they change foreign assistance priorities and policies, how they open it up to a broader range of individuals, how they work with multilingual inputs and responses. And so I think that is another thing that has come up in this conversation, but that I wanted to really hammer home. A third, I think, that we've referenced is that the ITU elections are this fall. And China's been quietly whipping votes and pushing on that election for a long time. And we need governments really thinking about how they get in each and every vote so that we are not saddled with an ITU that is being led by Russia for the coming years, because that will not do great things for the interoperable web or for multi-stakeholder approaches. Address export controls. Address what you are allowing companies within your jurisdictions to export. Look at how those exports are being used and think about whether or not you are fueling democratic orders, whether you are fueling the global liberal order, or whether in fact you are allowing your free market to aid repression and to aid authoritarianism in a way that will eventually kill that free market. That's another question we would argue that government should be engaging in and thinking about carefully. And are there any other big things that you feel like we should be calling on governments for?
Make impact assessment.
Use ISOC's impact assessment.
Yeah, it's free to use and it works very well. Yeah.
Anything else?
I can't top the honeypot comment, so I think you said it all.
I'm going to make it a bumper sticker.
Yeah,
I'm going to make
you
a
should.
T-shirt, y'all. It'll be a fundraiser.
Yeah.
Usama, how about you? Any additional?
I covered.
I think you said I covered everything. I'm reading your lips. Yes. Fantastic. And with that, we have 3 seconds left in our panel. So I am going to say thank you so much to our panelists. I'm going to say thank you for coming to the last session of this amazing summit. And we are going to turn it over to our incredible organizers to close us out. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.